Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to our annual event during Black History Month of celebrating Malcolm X. This is an event that we've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years, and we do it as an annual part of Black History Month, and always on February 24th. February 24th is the day that Malcolm was assassinated. But we choose to take this day as a time of celebrating his life, his contributions, and the legacy that he left all of us to continue to fight for justice that he so ably led. So my name is Darryl Heller. I'm the director of the IU South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center, from which we are holding this event, and I want to welcome everyone who's joining us virtually. Thank you for being here with us. And my brother, Dr. Theo Williams, is joining today, who is a professor of communications at Bethel College. What we're going to do is have a conversation. Many of you, I presume, know a bit about Malcolm, so we're not trying to teach you per se about Malcolm. That's not what this event is about. It's about having a conversation together, and it's really about continuing to deepen our understanding of what that transition and transformation that Malcolm continued to go through, similarly to how we talk about Dr. King, that neither one of these brothers, both of them warriors for justice, but neither one of them were static in their beliefs or in the positions that they held, but they each continue to evolve, and that's part of the legacy that they left us, is that as circumstances change and as they grow in wisdom and learn more, that they're able to adapt and to integrate that new knowledge, that new way of being, because ultimately for both of them, and for our conversation tonight about Malcolm, it was never about him as an individual, but it was about the collectivity of Black people, particularly, but humanity much more broadly and more generally. So we're gonna kick it. Through, there's a kind of a running slideshow that we'll just kind of leave going that has images of Malcolm. And I want to say just a couple of introductory remarks, and then my brother Theo is going to have some things to say. And we're kind of going to approach it slightly differently, but we're going to overlap and complement and probably have some conversation back and forth. But we also want to invite you, those of you who are joining us virtually, please type questions, comments in the chat, and join us in this conversation. Those of us in the audience, please feel free to just jump in and join with us in this. But I want to say just a couple of things about Malcolm, and this is perhaps maybe an overview. And again, I'm not assuming that it's new knowledge, perhaps to some, and if it is new, then I'm really glad that you can be exposed to this, because we think, obviously, that it's very important. So Malcolm was assassinated 57 years ago today, on February 21st, 1965. And I'd like to take a minute, and if we could, just take 1 minute of silence to just honor Malcolm and all the others who were martyred in the fight for justice. So just 1 minute. Thank you. So Malcolm was a complex person. But as I said earlier, his beauty was his willingness and his ability to grow, to reconsider his views in light of changing circumstances. During the last 11 months of his life, Malcolm moved at a frantic pace. As Brother Theo said, he knew the clock was running. He was in a period of transformation from a narrow Black nationalist perspective to an expansive internationalist view, from a position and a perspective of deficit to one of abundance. He believed that by bringing international attention to the plight of Black Americans, the nation would be forced to reckon with the Black world majority. Simultaneously, Black Americans would realize that they were not alone in their fight for justice. Malcolm astutely observed the liberation movements in Africa, Asia, Central and South America, and other parts where colonized people were living and fighting to throw off the yoke of oppression. In March 1964, less than a year before his life was cut short, Malcolm embarked on a 3-week trip to Africa in the Middle East. Ostensibly, he was fulfilling his religious duties by taking his Hajj, his pilgrimage to Mecca, the Holy Land. While overseas, he was honored as a guest by the state, as a guest of the state by the Prince of Saudi Arabia. He traveled to Lebanon, Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Senegal, and Morocco before returning to the US. Over the next several months, Malcolm established the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which was committed to doing whatever is necessary to bring the Negro struggle from the level of civil rights to the level of human rights. In order to gain international support for this new organization, Malcolm again headed to Africa in July 1964. He extends his African network by visiting Tanzania, Kenya, and French West Africa, as well as parts of Europe. By February 1965, Malcolm has gained the support of over 20 heads of state in Africa and other parts of the world to begin bringing the US to the world body and take it to task for its historic oppression of Black people. However, he was not able to see this all the way through because of an assassin's bullet. Malcolm's death, along with that of Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton, George Jackson, Medgar Evers, Emmett Till, and so many others, too many others, but their legacy is one of the direct reasons why, when we say Black Lives Matter, it continues to resonate today. That Malcolm brought that to us. And one of the quotes that I wanted to share with you and bringing, and often in the past we've talked about Malcolm and Martin, and I've certainly spoken at different times about the last year of each of their lives. And there's some uncanny and eerie parallels between the trajectory that Malcolm was on and that ultimately the trajectory that Martin Luther King took. And many of us believe that had they both lived, they would have come together. They were in a trajectory of meeting. And it was particularly and especially in the last year of their lives that they were making the most rapid transformations of expanding a view that was becoming increasingly, again, internationalist, and also making connections between economic oppression with racial oppression. And certainly for Malcolm, this notion that it wasn't just Black people in America that were oppressed, but there was a worldwide oppression of Black people, and that Black people formed the majority of the world's population, and that if they came together, not in any kind of retributive way or any kind of way for vengeance, but as a way of solidarity with one another, that justice for everybody could be achieved. So the quote from Malcolm that was left to us by James Baldwin, who was a friend to both of them. And Baldwin witnessed both of his very dear friends be assassinated. But Baldwin said, "It can be said indeed that Martin picked up Malcolm's burden, and that Malcolm was one of the people that Martin saw on the mountaintop." And Malcolm certainly was on that mountaintop. the king prophesied. And so we have quite a bit to say and just to kind of discuss back and forth, but I want to turn it over to Theo, who's going to kind of share some thoughts and particularly some comments on how the words of Malcolm, kind of drove what he was actually doing in his life and for us.
Yes, thank you, Brother Darryl. It's my pleasure to be here this evening to share some words about Malcolm X. One of my passions as a professor in terms of communication is I really enjoy studying and talking about rhetoric and examining just the power of words. And I believe that Brother Malcolm was very exacting with his words. And when we think about in today's society, how often we use and unfortunately misuse words, especially in terms of Malcolm X. When we think about Malcolm X, we think about by any means necessary. We think about by any means necessary, and how so many have taken that out of context. What did that mean? And we think it equates to violence. I remember talking to some students recently on MLK Day and asked them what they really admired most about MLK. And they said, we really appreciate the fact that he was all about nonviolence as opposed to Malcolm X. So there's this notion that MLK, his main theme was nonviolence and Malcolm's main theme was violence. And a lot of that stems from Malcolm talking about any means necessary. But I want to bring our attention to not just that content, but the context. And so there's actually no speech that exists that's entitled by any means necessary. It was actually an untitled speech that Malcolm was giving at the initial rally for the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And during this speech is the first time he really begins to drive home this point about any means necessary. I want to read an excerpt from this speech. It says, one says, so we have formed an organization known as the Organization of Afro-American Unity, which has the same aim and objective to fight whoever gets in our way, to bring about the complete independence of people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere, and first here in the United States, and bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary. So there's no specific reference to violence. He could be meaning a whole lot of stuff, yet based upon our own preconceived notions, we extrapolated violence. Another excerpt says, the Constitution of the United States of America clearly affirms the right of every American citizen to bear arms. And as Americans, we will not give up a single right guaranteed under the Constitution. The history of unpunished violence against our people clearly indicates that we must be prepared to defend ourselves. And that's important, that defense. Or we will continue to be defenseless, people at the mercy of a ruthless and violent racist mob. We assert that in those areas where the government is either unable or unwilling to protect, once again that word protect, the lives and property of our people, that our people are within their rights to protect themselves by whatever means necessary. I repeat, because to me, this is the most important thing you need to know. I already know it. We assert that in those areas where the government is unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of our people, that our people are within our rights to protect themselves by whatever means necessary. And when I hear that, I think about a recent story. My wife and I, we were watching television, and there was a news story about a TikTok artist. This young lady who was on TikTok, she had became very influential, and she had garnered this stalker. And this stalker showed up at her house, fell in love with her and had a weapon.
With a shotgun.
With a shotgun. The father chased him away. He came back and the father shot him. And it was an open shut case in terms of standing your ground, self-defense. So that is a very American law, a very American sentiment to be able to stand your ground and to defend yourself. Yet when Malcolm X talked about we should do so by any means necessary, that gets twisted and distorted that he is pro-violent. No, he is pro-self-defense. And then the final excerpt I'll read, it says, "This is our aim. It's rough. We have to smooth it up some. But we're not trying to put something together that's smooth. We don't care how rough it is. We don't care how tough it is. We don't care how backward it may sound. In essence, it only means we want one thing. We declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of all human beings in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary." Once again, no mention of violence. And then later on, this organization developed a charter. And in this charter, it talked about the importance of education. And he talked about how we should be fighting for our educational rights. It talked about the importance of keeping the family together. And he talked about fighting for the family. He talked about economic justice. And in all those contexts, he says we should strive to achieve those things by any means necessary. So I think it's unfortunate that over time, although he fought and said by any means necessary in terms of education, in terms of economics, in terms of keeping the family together, in terms of equality, we have extrapolated from that speech. And by the way, the speech was over 11,000 words long. It's almost 12,000 total words in his speech. The total word count for the times when he says by any means necessary is 333. So we took that line, lifted it out of the speech, and we made that the end all be all of not only the speech, but about his philosophy. Dr. King, non-violent. Malcolm X, violence by any means necessary. But I think that is a reductionist view of Malcolm X, and I think it's an inaccurate reductionist view of Malcolm X.
Well, I'm gonna jump in because one of the quotes that I have here is that what Malcolm said, and he said this over and over and over again in many different contexts, and he said it in this particular context: "I'm nonviolent with those who are nonviolent with me," which is fair. And you know, it's a different philosophy than Dr. King advocated. The turn the other cheek. Malcolm wasn't a turn the other cheek person, but he wasn't a turn the other cheek person because what he observed is that those who were inflicting violence on innocent Black folks who were simply trying to exercise their constitutional rights to vote, to have a decent living, to get a decent education, to provide for their children, and to live the American dream, that those who were inflicting that violence against those folks weren't turning the other cheek, that they were actually initiating violence. So the way that Malcolm gets misunderstood for a purpose, and it's really to kind of disparage and discredit what he was advocating, is that what Malcolm was simply saying is that we have an equal right to be part of this American dream as anybody else, and that those who will deny us of that, there should be a price to that, because we as Black people and we as oppressed people have been paying a price for centuries, and that it shouldn't always just go one way. And the famous, you know, what people also know about him is the ballad of the bullet, and it's like, oh my God, you know, if we don't get the vote, they're going to start shooting, right? And what Malcolm said. It'll be ballots or it'll be bullets. It'll be liberty or it will be death. The only difference about this kind of death is that it'll be reciprocal. And he's just saying we have the same dignity and we stand on equal footing with everyone else, and that there's no way that we should go down without fighting. and fighting by any means necessary, and taking what we have available to us. And just one more thing, what I was really struck, and when I first discovered Malcolm, that and I think the thing that made me love him was his shift from Black nationalism, which was a narrow view, and kind of his observation of the civil rights movement that was fighting for civil rights and to be included in the American democratic process, with all of its privileges and advantages and rights and whatnot. But what Malcolm realized that was too small, that civil rights wasn't really the goal. The goal needed to be human rights.
Yes.
And what he said, and this is just another quote, because I think Malcolm is so quotable in all of this, that I think is taking his words. What he said is, we need to expand the civil rights struggle to a higher level, to the level of human rights. Civil rights comes within the domestic affairs of this country. As long as it's civil rights, this comes under the jurisdiction of Uncle Sam. Civil rights mean you're asking Uncle Sam to treat you right. Human rights are something that you're born with. Human rights are your God-given rights. Human rights are the rights that are recognized by all nations on this earth. And anytime anyone violates your human rights, you can take them to the World Court, not to the Supreme Court, because we've been failed by the Supreme Court over and over and over again in multiple ways. And we're noticing that now, just to bring it into contemporary context, as the erosion of voting rights is just but one example of how the courts are rolling back and eroding what we would think are rights that we had achieved through struggle are now being taken away or being reduced. And Malcolm wouldn't countenance that. Malcolm was like, no, this is injustice, and we have a right to fight that.
I think that's a very profound view of Brother Malcolm as he evolved over time in terms of the narrow view, the very exclusionary view of who could be a part of the struggle, to a more inclusive, more global view of both the struggle as well as a global, more inclusive view in the solution. And I think that's the unfortunate part of this story, that we never got to see the fully realized version of Malcolm X and the fully realized version of Dr. King. Because yes, you could make the case that at one point in time they were almost at polar opposites on this continuum. But over time, there's emergence that begins to happen. And I think that's what was more dangerous. I think that is what the powers that be formulated, that we cannot allow this to happen. As long as, okay, you have this powerful force over here and you have this powerful force over here, but one thing we got going for us is that they're kind of at odds with each other. But the more they begin to have a meeting of the minds, that was what was making them even more dangerous. And it's unfortunate that when that normally happens, that's when your light gets cut off. And so we never got a chance to really see the fullness. So I would love to imagine, Malcolm X even a few years down the line.
Well, one thing, I'll say it, and I want the audience to jump in. I don't know if we have any folks on our virtual audience who want to just chime in either with questions or comments. But one of the things is, again, the parallels between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, again, are uncanny in one sense, right? Because as each of them expanded their view, each of them became actually more inclusive in their view. As Dr. King moves from civil rights, he was moving towards human rights as well, and identifying the tripartite oppression of racism, militarism, and capitalism, right? You know, and that was a much more expansive. It's not just the civil rights. We're not just fighting for the right to vote, but we're fighting for the right for decency, for dignity, for housing, for education, for all of the things that are required for a dignified life. Just as Malcolm was expanding from Black nationalism to internationalism, that expansion, I would suggest, made them both much more of a threat than they were in that more narrow band.
Especially when you're talking about economics.
Well, as long as King was just fighting for the right to vote, it's like we can do that. But once you start calling out capitalism and militarism, and really calling racism for what racism is and what the implications of that are, or when you start talking about taking the United States to the World Court,
the World Court, the UN, yeah. So I think that's another great point that you're making in terms of within their respective boxes early on, there was still some safety in terms of their threat level. But as they begin to come outside those boxes, and that's part of American history in dealing with people, oppressed people, especially minority people we don't understand, is we have them in boxes. We have them, as long as you stay within these parameters, we will allow you to do what you do. For Malcolm, as much as some people may have been against the Nation of Islam, the government knew Malcolm X in the Nation of Islam still has some parameters from Elijah Muhammad on down in terms of don't speak out against these things, don't ruffle these particular feathers. We're more in tune with doing our own thing. We don't need you speaking against their leaders. Whereas when Malcolm X began to go off script and say, no, I'm going to call these things out, all of a sudden now that's more dangerous. When Dr. King is going off script and saying, no, let's talk about economics, let's talk about these things, all of a sudden, let's talk about equal wages, all of a sudden now you're going off script, there's more danger. And I think that's the history of America, that even if you are considered adversarial, you're still, it's almost like, you know, we've been going through this pandemic, and we're always monitoring the numbers, and are we in the red? And there's different factors that say how you get into the red as far as new cases and these other things. Well, there was a similar monitoring system for brothers like Malcolm X, assessing his threat level. And as long as he's in the blue or the orange or yellow, depending on, at Bethel University, we have blue, yellow, and I think orange or something like that. But I think in the county, red is the highest, and then orange. So if you stay in this yellow-orange range, you're a threat. But we know how to navigate that threat. When you get into this red range, and all of a sudden some of those things that we could navigate, and you've broken out of that box, that's when we have to mandate some type of response. Unfortunate for his family, but it shows you the level of commitment that he had in terms of his willingness. He didn't, imagine preaching the passion he preached with to the people. He demonstrated that passion by saying, when I tell y'all by any means necessary, I'm willing to live it out. Because it wasn't like there's no threat of his life being ended and then his life gets ended. No, there's a constant threat of that. So he had plenty of opportunity to say, you know what? My people, I have reconsidered my stance and the cost is too high. No, each threat, Brother Darryl was just pointing out the timeline of Malcolm, was it the last 2 weeks?
The last 2 weeks of his life.
Last 2 weeks. And he had how many events?
Too many to count.
Too many to account, and including 7 speeches in the last 4 days of his life. And when I see that, I was like, it's like he knew he was on the clock. that there was an urgency, that time is of the essence. He didn't take the threat so lightly and he said, I got time. No, he took the threat so seriously that I don't have a lot of time. But here's how I'm going to spend my time, making sure you know I'm going to double down on all that I've been saying. I thought that was very profound.
Yeah.
Just so everybody online.
So the confluence of Malcolm and Martin on the Vietnam War, I think is a good point you bring out, that was a threat to the establishment. Mm-hmm. And we know that there's, till this day, people are confused or debating on who was involved, but we know that the government actively worked against them and promoted, was somehow involved with the death. Would you expound on those topics, please?
Involved in what? Be specific.
In the assassination?
And so the threat that was made against Malcolm, the New York Police Department working with someone and being involved in death, and J. Edgar Hoover also being attacking Martin. But since we're talking about Malcolm, just the NYPD being involved in his death.
I would say most investigations, most research that you can do would lead us to believe that the US government, FBI, NYPD, the Nation of Islam, whether from the top, whether you want to say it was from the top or some rogue faction, that all those parties, and maybe even some unnamed parties, were involved in that. When you look at how calculated, and a lot of it goes down to was Malcolm's distancing himself from the Nation of Islam, not from Islam as a religion, but from that particular organization in terms of some of his views, his philosophies. When that begins to happen, when you are tightly aligned to a group, it almost becomes the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So imagine the conversations that are taking place where this Malcolm X guy, he's a problem for all of us. Versus, he's your problem, not my problem. Things don't get accomplished when he's your problem, but not my problem. Because no one wants to be the one holding the bag. But when someone becomes your problem, Brother Darryl's problem, and my problem, and all of a sudden we have a meetings of the mind, hey, you and I, to be honest, I don't even like you like that. But for the moment, we have a bigger problem. You and I, we don't know each other that well. But for the moment, we have a mutual problem. Let us collectively take care of this problem. Now, after that, what happens after that between you and I and me and Brother Darryl, we'll worry about that later on. But for now, the biggest thorn in all of our sides is Malcolm X. That's how I believe that conversation went down.
Yeah, and you know, to your point, we both know that both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King had these massive FBI files on them, right?
Massive.
You know, and so we'll go with Dr. King for just a second, right? You know, so in 1963, he was beloved. You know, he was preaching peace and nonviolence and dreams, and you know, though you know how I think what Theo said earlier about Malcolm and how by any means necessary has been pulled out and then spun in a particular way to disparage Malcolm. It's almost the opposite with King, right? The I have a dream, you know, we should judge people by the character, the content of their character, not the color of their skin. A lot of right-wing folks like to pull out and quote nowadays. That was only a little piece of what he had to say in that I have a dream, because what he talked about and what his speech was about a promissory note and a check that had come back insufficient funds. That's what he was talking about, and he was talking about his time for that check to be cashed. Theo and I were talking about this the other night, and it's like, you know, in modern terms, it'd be like, well, what King was saying is like, your check ain't good no more. We want cash. You know, we're not taking another check.
Yeah.
And we're here right now because we want that cash. But he also talked about a dream because he realized that this was a process. And so when you know they say that Mahalia Jackson said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin," and he talked about the dream. That was 1963. 1967, King said, "It's time to break the silence." You know, this war that's happened in Vietnam is not only killing poor people, black and white. So he identified class in that, right? And he also identified the fact that the capitalism, the military-industrial complex that was profiting from that war was draining resources. Johnson's, LBJ's War on Poverty, that was supposed to be a fulfillment of the 1964 Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the money and the resources that could have been used to uplift people and to create the kinds of safety nets and foundations for human development was actually being shifted to destruction. And King said, as a man of conscience, I cannot be silent about this any longer. And I would say that the moment he said he can't be silent anymore was the moment he became dangerous and he became someone who couldn't be tolerated. And so I don't know if we'll ever know. And it was at this point in 1967 that King became the most dangerous man in America, according to J. Edgar Hoover. And so I don't know if we'll ever know who really killed him, but we do know with Malcolm that those who were accused of shooting Malcolm and killing Malcolm in the Audubon Ballroom in 1965, at least one of them has been exonerated. And we know that, I don't know if any of our virtual audience are here, has seen the docu-series of Who Killed Malcolm X. But it's really telling of the kind of research that one person did, just committed to looking into the murder of Malcolm and finding so many different holes in the particular stories that the official version came up with. And so, I think it was a collaboration. This is conjecture, of course, between the police, government officials, and the Nation of Islam. May have been used as a puppet or a tool to accomplish the task. But it wasn't just their doing. Malcolm talked about that. Malcolm, in the last couple of weeks of his life, where he had been really kind of going head to head with the Nation of Islam, he stopped and he shifted. And it's like, why am I fighting the nation? One, they're kind of irrelevant, for one, he said, but it's also, they're not the real enemy. The real enemy is those who are keeping us from voting, those who are keeping us in ghettos, those who are denying us the opportunities. And that's the real enemy. We need to talk about LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, not fulfilling his word to the Black community and to folks in general. And so there was a real investment in a number of forces, a number of powers that be, to silence both of them.
And I think that's a great point when you talk about the hierarchy and how the Nation of Islam was more than likely pawns or puppets in it. It's very difficult to assassinate the character or physically assassinate any person in power in a particular culture without having some inside help from the culture. Even if that's because of someone's in your ear saying, hey, you may be better off if he's gone. Oh yeah, you're right. And like I said, no one wants to get their hands dirty, so you often want to have someone else be the fall person. And so I think that's the unfortunate part of what demised Brother Malcolm is the fact that there were many who should have been in this corner, who should have said, although we may not totally agree with all of your methods, we are fully on board with what you're trying to accomplish. And we may not fully always support you, but we're not going to be used at all to fully come against you. And I think Dr. King had that revelation.
Yes, George.
So in addition to the people in person, we have 18 online. And Chip Roush had a great question.
Yes.
It seems like the movement for Black Lives achieved a moment early in the pandemic where the white majority understood the struggle. Since then, the culture has backpedaled and re-embraced distraction and apathy. What might Malcolm say to reinvigorate the masses today?
I think what Malcolm, the trajectory he was on when he was assassinated with the building of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, I think Malcolm would have said, we need to organize, but we need to organize not just within the US border. Like there's still international struggles happening. And I think Malcolm would really be pushing at this point to connect the Black Lives Matter movement. Because what was happening with Black Lives Matter, what we noticed that when George Floyd was murdered in public, it didn't just resonate in the US, it resonated all over the world. And people in other countries throughout Europe, for example, or Australia, folks recognize what happened to George Floyd as analogous to what was happening to them in their context, the kind of racial oppression that folks had been either as post-colonial, as colonial subjects, or as oppressed people as in Australia with Aboriginal people, that they came out and began protesting. And it was, I think internationally, and I think Malcolm would have been pleased with this. I think Malcolm would have been pleased that it was interracial or multiracial protest, because that speaks to the people's recognition that it is a human rights issue, not just a narrow civil rights or within my national sector. But I think Malcolm would have been making connections with folks in other parts of the world that were connecting their struggle with that murder of George Floyd. That's a very public murder of George Floyd. That probably and almost certainly has been replicated in other parts of the world that people were responding to. Like folks, just as a human being, recognize that that murder / execution of George Floyd could touch everybody on the human level. But it wasn't something I don't think that people internationally saw this necessarily as an anomaly. I think they recognized that in many different instances that they had experienced within their own culture, within their own historical framework. And that for Malcolm, building those international solidarity movements would have been a powerful thing to do. So really, I think he would have been, as he traveled, he would have gone to Australia, he would have gone to London, he would have gone to Copenhagen, he would have gone to Paris, where those reactions to that murder were happening. And it was both a reaction, again, on the human level to what was graphically displayed in the US, but they were also protesting the struggles that they were experiencing in their context. And I think Malcolm would have tried to build bridges between those contexts for an internationalist movement.
And that's a great response. The only thing I would also add is what was unique about that time period, since the brother specifically referenced during the pandemic. One thing the pandemic did, especially during the height of the pandemic when we had the stay at home, and when you talk about global, the pandemic was global. So we got to think about it from that standpoint also. This was a global pandemic. Everyone is staying at home all over the world, especially in the United States in our context. So I believe that part of the reason why that summer with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, why it resonated with so many people was we didn't have the same buffers that we normally had. We weren't going to the movie theaters. We weren't busy on our 9-to-5 grind. We were taking classes on Zoom. We were at home to watch those videos over and over, to watch the protests over and over. People didn't have to call off of work to go protest. We weren't at work. And so for the first time at least in my history, since I've been on the earth, the whole world had stopped for a while. or at least slowed down. So that allowed us, if we were willing to be awakened to those issues. Whereas normally we could have turned the TV off, I'm going to the gym. Turn the TV off, I'm going to the movies. I need to go to work. No, we had time on our hands, and that was the end-all be-all story. So I think one of the things Brother Malcolm would have probably did was he would have reminded us, once there was no longer the stay-at-home mandates, once we were able to go back to the movies, and once we were able to go back to our jobs and fellowship with our families, he would have reminded us to not allow those beautiful things that we should be able to enjoy, those luxuries that we should be able to enjoy, not to distract us, not to sedate us, not to put us back into that funk where it's all about us, busy, 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 where we get too busy to care for our brothers and sisters. And I think Dr. King would have said the same thing. So tying it back to that, to the capitalism and that was the driving force to go back, make money, get back to the jobs, the leisure, movies, sporting activities. Well, we saw for a moment when we were able to put those things at hold, we were forced to deal with this reality that always existed. It was slightly different with George Floyd because of the length of the video. They couldn't say, well, you don't know what happened 5 minutes prior, this 30-second clip, because the video was so long. But I believe the fact that we no longer had those buffers and we were bombarded by it, it awakened some people to what many already knew. And I thought that was a shift. Now the key is, how do we intentionally replicate that shift now that we're back to the grind, now that we're back on the clock? How do we not forget about what we felt during that summer?
I don't know if any other questions. No, because I just want to build on that, because the thing about George Floyd and about the multiracial internationalist response to it. The other way that Malcolm gets disparaged and painted as a villain is that he was a racist, right? That he was a black nationalist. He hated white people. He called the blonde-haired, blue-eyed devils, which was all part of the rhetoric that came out of the Nation of Islam. And Theo and I were talking about this because I was really, one of the things that moved me the most about Malcolm was, again, his growth. And yes. I forget the year, but when Malcolm was very much a black nationalist in the Nation of Islam, and he had given a talk at Harvard. And after his talk at Harvard, a white female student, came to him and said, how can I help? I want to be part of this movement. I want to support you. And Malcolm basically said, no, there ain't nothing you can do because y'all are, I forget the exact quote, but it's like, white people ain't got no role to play in this. And as he said, she left crying. I mean, because she was really hurt by that and, kind of left not knowing what to do. And I'm gonna see if I can find this quickly. His last couple of weeks of Malcolm's life, Malcolm actually referenced that incident again. Here. This was February 19th, 1965. This is 3 days before he's assassinated. He's given an interview with Gordon Parks. And in the middle of his interview, and I'll just read this, it's relatively short. It says, he stopped, this is the interview, he stopped and remained silent for a few minutes. Brother, Malcolm said, remember the time that white college girl came into the restaurant, the one who wanted to help the Muslims and whites get together? And I told her there wasn't a ghost of a chance, and she went away crying? Gordon Parks says, yes, I remember that. Malcolm says, well, I've lived to regret that incident. In many parts of the African continent, I saw white students helping black people. Something like this kills a lot of argument. I did many things as a Muslim that I'm sorry for now. I was a zombie then, like all Muslims. By all Muslims, he means black Muslims in this context. I was hypnotized and pointed in a certain direction and told to march. Mm. Well, I guess a man's entitled to make a fool of himself if he's ready to pay the cost. It cost me 12 years. That's a powerful statement of acknowledging, that what I did was wrong, and that I need to pay, I need to like really own that. So I think that Malcolm, as he grew, would have been more open and accepting of white people. But the other part about Malcolm and that I was moved by when I was a teenager and first discovering him was like, is what I think, I don't remember if Malcolm called it this exactly, but he called it the John Brown test. When the reporter asked, like, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, and the reporter asked him, was like, can white people join this organization? And the kind of way I think about it, this may not be exactly historically accurate, but I think it's the gist of it. Like Malcolm paused and said, if John Brown were alive, he could join. And how I understood that Malcolm was open to anybody who was fully down with the struggle and willing to lay it all on the line. Any white person, like he didn't suffer fools, and he didn't suffer liberals. He didn't suffer rhetoric. It's like, if you're fully down with the struggle, and by fully down, you got to be willing to do what I'm willing to do, which is I'm willing to die for this. And short of that, for white people, that's the test. If you are fully open to giving everything to this movement, because this is, again, and this is where I think Malcolm was powerful, that this is about human rights. This is about human dignity, and no compromises in that. And what I think he found is that he didn't trust most white people, because most white people weren't willing to put all of their skin in the game, in the way that Black people had all of their skin in the game every day, just by living in a racist white supremacist society. Their skin was in the game every day. White people could choose to be in or out. And Malcolm was only willing to countenance people, and particularly white people, who were willing to put all of their skin in all of the time for the movement.
And I think
that was deep.
You and I we were talking about this last night. The reason why I like it being contextualized like that is because there are a lot of us in a lot of different circumstances when we find ourselves on the outside and we want to inquire, what is the cost of me joining this thing? I've observed from afar, and I really want to be a part of the movement. Whatever the movement is, what's the cost? And we could come up with an arbitrary list of this, and this, but then we're probably going to be moving the goalposts for certain people, minimizing the cost for certain people. What I liked about the way Malcolm explained it and how you interpreted what Malcolm said was, let's have this objective cost. And this objective cost is this. Here's what I've had to do to be in this movement. Here's what I've had to do to put up with this life. I've been subject to this, I've been subject to this, I've been beat, I've been arrested, whatever that list is. It's not an interpretation of the list, it is the list. Here are all the things, all the costs I've had to pay. Take personal stuff out of it. If you are willing to pay that cost that I've had to pay, who am I to say that you can't be part of this? I think that standard in all movements should be the standard. When someone who has the liberty to traffic in and out of a particular thing, to be in it when it's in vogue, to when it's the popular thing, when it's the fad, but to be able to remove themselves when things get rough, that shouldn't be the standard. Standard should be, am I willing to pay admission? And that admission is commensurate to the admission that those who didn't want to be in it had to pay. So yes, I think that's it. For those of us who didn't want that struggle, here's what we paid. For those of us who want the struggle, here's what you're going to pay also. And if you're not willing to pay that, do you really think about think about this cost before you jump into this. Do you really want to pay that cost? Because if you don't want to pay that cost, then it's probably best for you to stay on the sidelines, because even those who are in it would rather pay that cost to get out of it, oftentimes. And here you are romanticizing it, want to be a part of it. Cool, come on. But here's the cost. Here's the price of admission. It's a high cost. It cost Malcolm his life. It cost Martin his life. It should cost all of us our lives if we're really, truly wanting to be part of that. Not saying that we would wish and desire to die, but we're willing to have your reputation assassinated, to have your economics assassinated. You got this really good job, and I like my good job, and this person likes their good job. And if I keep speaking, I may lose my good job. Well, are you willing to pay that price? Your friends who like you for all the wrong reasons assassinate the reputation. Are you willing to pay that price? If we're not willing to pay those prices of having our whole being assassinated, then we could just continue just to do what we do. Mm-hmm. And we both said, at least I said, I'm not sure to the fullest extent. I have not made up in my mind or my heart yet. If I'm willing, you'll never know you're willing to pay that price. It sounds good, but I've never had my phone ring talking about drop this or else. I never had someone outside of my house talking about drop this or else. That's what Malcolm had, and he chose or else.
Yes.
That is profound, Theo. And I thought about this. I just want to bring what those guys went through. So with the attack on voting rights, what you just said, am I willing to write something to the paper or just write how I really feel about this attack on voting rights, because it might come back on me? How committed am I to that? Mm-hmm. But I believe we are at an inflection point, right?
Yes.
This country is going backwards real fast. Mm. And we can't depend on the courts, the gerrymandering. The people aren't being represented. Mm-hmm. And we need to look to people like Malcolm to figure out which way we need to go. Mm-hmm.
Mm. And I think what we also need to do is look within ourselves and make those decisions as well. Because both as Theo said, as Malcolm lived and Martin lived, and so many others who were martyred, in this fight for justice, that those who are committed to maintaining the status quo of oppression are dead serious about maintaining that status quo of oppression. And the question for us is, how serious are we? And I think that what you said, it's like, what risk am I willing to take? Because it all comes down to risk. Like, how risk adverse are you? Because you step outside of the status quo, you do very often put a target on your back. And it may not be a target with your life, but it may be a target, as Theo said, and you said, your reputation, your job, your good graces for somebody you want to respect you, or whatever that cost might be. Are you willing to take that risk and to stand on what I believe Malcolm, Martin, and others stand on principle and draw a hard line in the sand and say, no, we will not go beyond this. This is where I'm putting down my stakes, and I will not be moved. That old civil rights song, "We shall not be moved." That's the position we have to take, and that's something each of us have to search in ourselves for. But I know from Malcolm, I don't know, but I believe, from Malcolm's perspective, he wasn't willing to spend a whole lot of time with folks that weren't willing to do that, to draw that line and put their stake down and says, no, this is where I'm standing. Human rights means that much, and not just for me. Because the fight ain't just about for me and my family. This is a fight for justice and for our collectivity, for our collective humanity. That's the fight I think Malcolm was waging. I think that's the fight that Martin was waging. I think that's the fight that Fred Hampton was waging, and Medgar Evers and so many others.
I think in hearing you say that, one thing that comes to mind is, maybe for individuals like Malcolm X, although it was a risk, and although he knew he was risking his life, his livelihood, his reputation, and when you say being in the good graces of others, maybe that risk doesn't seem as risky once you come to grips that on your best day, you're not in the, he was not in the good graces of others. That whatever livelihood he had was not the livelihood that maybe he deserved, the livelihood that he had earned. And so when you got some stuff and you think that the stuff you got is the stuff, you don't want to lose that. But when you get the revelation that the stuff that you got isn't really the stuff that you could have or should have, and being in the good graces of those who don't even see you in that positive light anyway, and the life that you do have is not the life that you could have, all of a sudden then you're like, well, I'm willing to lose this life. Because what I have this isn't the life. And I think that's what's holding us back today. And I think that's, if Malcolm was alive today, he would remind us, for all of the forward movement, for all of the advances that have taken place, that we're still not where we should be. That we're still not fully treated. So as they're trying to roll back these voting rights, as there's one victory in the court system, but then there's 2 steps back. There's one conviction over here, but then there's 2 acquittals over here. All that stuff should serve as a reminder that we're still not there. And so anyone who is tempted to say, well, why should we fight when we've come so far? Well, it's great that we've come so far, but we still have so much farther to go. It means there's still a fight. We have not arrived. We have not gotten close to arrival. So we can't get complacent. We can't become sedated. We can't become muted for fear of losing this little patch that we've been given, this little morsel that we've been given, when what we deserve based upon our human rights is so much more.
I was just trying to find something. I can't admit I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking for it, but again, I just continue to use as a model for myself, like Malcolm's continual evolution. And what I was just looking for is just kind of related but a tangent, is he evolved in his position on women. And there's just a really small piece where Malcolm kind of acknowledged that, kind of in the Nation of Islam and in the women were kind of second-class citizens, but are related to not fully as equal and part of the movement, but that he recognized that that was wrong. And that, women have been a significant part of the movement, from the beginning. And so he actually, I believe, met with Fannie Lou Hamer. And, despite what people think about Rosa Parks loved Malcolm. There's a really beautiful picture of Rosa Parks holding a Malcolm X poster. Because Rosa Parks wasn't, I think, this is almost, I forget the big word for it, but it's almost like heresy, that Rosa Parks wasn't always just like turn the other cheek, nonviolent person. Rosa Parks was a fighter and an activist. And she admired the pride that Malcolm took in Black people, and also the insistence that self-defense was a legitimate response to being attacked.
And I bet if you polled a lot of individuals in Martin's camp, when they were off the record and when Martin wasn't around, that, they struggled with the nonviolence. So that's the real debate. Maybe white America doesn't know that in terms of just how split the Black community may have been in terms of Malcolm and Martin. Because Martin has his national holiday, he's celebrated, I Have a Dream. But there was a large segment of the population that was marching with Martin, who wanted to, root for Malcolm, or have a hybrid of both. And so I think that's important. That was a real struggle. Does the brother have a?
Oh yeah.
I would just like to say I appreciate for what you guys have said so far. I'm sorry I've been a little tired, but
All right.
as a founding father of Black Lives Matter South Bend, I myself have always wondered how. Oh yeah, and I also appreciate that the whole philosophy of Malcolm X. I think what you said is that the whole point by any means necessary is like about self-defense. Like for example, if someone were to attack your family member, you know, with violence, you're going to respond with violence in order to protect them. I very appreciate that. At least I hope I interpreted that correctly. And also, what do you think Brother Malcolm would have to say about like all the ego tripping and all the lack of solidarity within our modern Black community, even today in this postmodern 21st century of 2022? I mean, what do you think he would do with all our technology and computer influence and like expansion of multimedia, and like we have a bit of solidarity within the Black community, but it's still a lot of hate within. What do you think Brother Malcolm would do?
I'll let you do that, but I just want to give an addendum or clarification in terms of the self-defense. Even when it's true that Brother Malcolm advocated for self-defense when he talked about any means necessary. But even when we reduce self-defense down to physical violence, meeting with violence, I think that's reductionary also. He also meant, how do you defend yourself against economic oppression? What do you do if someone's trying to separate fathers out of the home? What do you do when someone's attacking a single mother in terms of cutting some of her financial abilities? By any means necessary, defend yourself. But if we were to look at that original speech, part of what he was saying is part of that self-defense is, yes, if someone violently attacks you, he believes that you should be to violently defend yourself. But he also says, defend yourself with education. Defend yourself by starting these businesses. Defend yourself by fathers and mothers and children solidifying the family. So I think it's important that even when we say that he was pro-self-defense, that we don't reduce self-defense down to just against physical violence, but anything that was attacking us, whether from an economic, from an educational. So I would say to ourselves, do we defend ourselves as vehemently in terms of, I'm gonna attack those things. I'm gonna get that education. I'm gonna go out there and fight for these voting rights. I'm gonna go out there and do those things, because that was at the heart of what Brother Malcolm was saying. So I'll let you get to the social media and all that stuff like that.
Well, no, that was really powerful. I think that's absolutely right in terms of how Malcolm thought about any means necessary. It's not just physical means, but we had to free our mind.
Yes.
As much as we had to free our bodies, right, and to defend our minds as well. But Malcolm, just like everyone else, I mean, I think recognized that the Black community is not homogenous. You know, his speech, I mean, many folks have heard of his speech, the House Negro and the Field Negro. And Malcolm recognized that there were House Negroes out there, and that every Black person's not gonna be on board and willing to do this fight and to carry on this struggle in the same way. Though he was fighting on behalf of all Black people, all Black people weren't going to join it. And so I think he would, you know, looking today, I think he would just kind of say to him, we got to organize with those who get it, those who are down with this struggle, those who are willing to go this distance. Those are the folks that are going to be on the grounds with us. The recruiting he was doing for the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And he spoke in Alabama, Selma, a couple of weeks before he was assassinated. And he talked about, we're gonna start recruiting for the Organization of Afro-American Unity in the South for some of those disaffected young folks who didn't feel that they could turn the other cheek, that they also needed an organized avenue. And he began working with SNCC, and he made a commitment to supporting the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that actually didn't have the same philosophy as King did, or at least some of the members of SNCC. These are young students, these are young folk who I think folks like Stokely Carmichael, who King couldn't quite constrain in that. And, you know, so when Stokely stood up in 1968, and this was past Malcolm, but when Stokely stood up and said Black Power, and he said Black Power out of frustration, because he's like, I've been arrested 27 times, and I've been beat over the head X number of times. I'm tired of that. And they kind of had reached that limit, and I think that those are the folks that Malcolm would have been reaching for, that they could have an avenue where they could participate in building a movement for self-worth, for self-respect, for dignity, that kind of took no shit, you know, in the process.
And I'm pretty sure he would have been encouraging those who, quote unquote, make it. Celebrities, athletes, those social media influencers. How are you using your platform? To whom much is given, much is expected. So I'm pretty sure he would have been challenging any who had that type of influence to make sure we're using that influence for the greater good.
Thank you so much for this discussion. I'm really enjoying it. And something that's been kind of on my heart all day that I just wanted to ask about. Theo, when you were talking earlier about how, you know, some people argue we've come this far, you know, but so, you know, don't you know, make waves too much because, you know, we've already got these gains, we want more gains. You said something about arrival, and that word really got me thinking, like, what does arrival look like? I was at the MLK event today, and I felt like, especially there, the few people I spoke to, arrival often sounds like it's like this like white middle class suburban, you know, like if only all people could access this white suburban middle class lifestyle. And like I get arrival is at a minimum, don't be killed, you know, don't like let me survive. But I feel like what was so threatening about A Time to Break Silence is acknowledging that there's actually a whole lot more to, in my opinion, to arrival than just white suburban middle class lifestyle. And that talking about things like healthcare for all and economic justice is so much more threatening than just, hey, let me in, let me play too. I'm curious, your readings of Malcolm X and MLK, what your thoughts on what arrival means.
Well, I'm not sure I mean, I can't speak for those two brothers, but I think for me, and I think this is in line with what both we're talking about, arrival, we think about arrival in the context of there is this measurable destination that we can arrive to. I think at the very bare minimum, though, arrival isn't an external measurable destination of here's what it would mean in terms of white picket fence, a house, a good job, these things but can we arrive at the place where we view each other, where we treat each other as with the human dignity that we deserve? Or me being a pastor in our Christian faith, we learn about all people, regardless of what your faith is, all people were created in the imago Dei, the image of God. Part of my arrival is seeing you and treating you as if you were truly created in the image of God. Now, that doesn't mean that now you have the good house, the good car, the good thing, but it means there's a starting place in terms of who you are, who I see you to be, who I perceive you to be. And I believe if we start there, seeing each other as human beings, and then affording to each other the rights, the dignity, the honor due each other as human beings, I think then we can begin to contextualize what would be some practical outworkings of that. But if we focus on the practical outworkings, what if you do? Okay, so LeBron James, being a multi-hundred-million-dollar person, he has the car, but he can still get mistreated. You can have someone who's arrived by this measurable standard, but can still get mistreated. So it can't be based upon the measurable, meet this criteria. It has to be how we begin to treat one another. That has to be the starting. If we can arrive at that revelation, I think some of the other stuff would practically begin to work themselves out. But if I don't see you that way, I'll think that whatever you got is what you got. And you should be grateful. And that's the key in America, be grateful, because you had slavery. Now you're not a slave. I think that's a big come up. We should be grateful.
Well, and I'm going to speak it as the non-minister here.
and that's why we can work well.
Because when you said that, and just even the language that's used, and I'm sure I know exactly what you're referring to, is like, can I come in? I like, it's arriving from, I would dare say for Malcolm and Martin, and certainly for me, it's not about me individually. Because often how that language gets used and how we think about arriving is like, oh, let us as individuals in. I think that the fight, the real struggle, and I think this is complementing exactly what Theo said, is that this has to be a collective. This is not about arriving. So I am somebody that has privilege, and I recognize that. I got a serious bourgeois education, got a job that I love dearly. I own my own house. I ain't got a lot of money, but I don't go hungry. I got privilege, in a way. And if this fight is really just about me getting there to this place, then that's not a fight worth having. If it's not a fight for all of us, and this is where I will go with my Christian brothers, if it's not a fight for the least of us, then it can't be a fight for any of us. And so I think that both King and Malcolm were both ministers. And they both had that spiritual core deep inside of them, and I think that was driving them. And I think that drove them in a way of recognizing, as Theo said, the dignity and the humanity of everyone is what needs to be arrived, not just individuals, not just, and Martin recognized this, and I think that this is where his fight about capitalism was, that the system will accommodate some individuals arriving so that it can say that it is just, while simultaneously oppressing the vast majority. But once one makes it right, it's like, now we had a black president, racism is over, right?
Post-racial.
We've had two, I said this the other night in another context, but we've had two black Supreme Court justices in the history of this country, in the entire history of this country. And one of them continues to fight just as hard to keep people down as any of the white ones in there. So it's not just about black and white even. Again, I think this is the point that Malcolm was making about the John Brown test. It don't matter if you're black or white, but if you're down with the struggle and you want to put all your skin in the game, then we can talk. Then we can work this together. But it's much more about the we than the I, and I think that that's true for both of them. And certainly, I think that's what we need now. That's also what we need now, because we can get trapped easily into individual uplift, and the conservatives like to talk about personal responsibility and blaming people for failing, blaming people for being poor, blaming people for being from broken homes, and blaming people for all of, without looking at the structural issues. And the structures don't keep individuals down, they keep groups down, they keep masses down. And if we're not fighting that and recognizing that, then we even if I have material benefits and I gain some material as an individual, that's not arriving.
That's great stuff. Yeah. And ironically, if Dr. King wanted to, he could have himself arrived. If that was the case, he could have easily parlayed his high point in 60, to be the arrival. And I'm pretty sure that was a selling point behind closed doors. If you work this right, you can be. He was like, nah.
I was wondering, after that beautiful response you had for their question, I was wondering, is there, so do you think Malcolm would, because like I study, I have a pretty privileged life, I have options, education and things like that. I got to organize locally and globally. And so I was wondering, is the conclusion to our goal, and Brother Malcolm and Brother King and Brother Hampton's goal, who were all killed by the state, is the goal the actual end of what we call capitalism and like the whole neoliberal thought, along with carry on towards like a centralized democracy and more like socialism of multiracial unity? Is that the goal, or am I wrong?
Well, you know, what I would say is I don't think we can predetermine that end. I think that we collectively need to make some of those decisions. Yes, certainly, whatever structure that the goal is, the structure is. I mean, I have kind of a very simple moral theory about, a very simple moral theory, and it's called nobody gets two until everybody has one. You know, it's pretty simple, right? Like, you don't get two houses when there's people sleeping in the streets. Or you don't get 10 pair of shoes in your closets when people are walking barefoot. That's just immoral. That's immoral in my opinion. You know, what structure will produce that kind of equity for everyone? It certainly ain't the one we living in. That much I know. Will it be communism, socialism, or some of those other isms? I mean, it's probably some version of what gets labeled as that. But what gets labeled as communism or socialism isn't how I think about communism or socialism. Those are generally used to discredit people. Those labels are generally used to discredit people. And I think that ultimately, and this is something that in the work around restorative justice and transformative justice, that it's actually, if we're going to have any kind of repair and any kind of transformation, those who've been harmed have to play a very active and central role in deciding what the repair is going to look like and how we're going to transform. Like, though we can't impose that. So I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know I certainly know what it ain't. And what it ain't is what we got now.
Yeah. And I don't know if either Martin or Malcolm knew what it looked like either. We got to remember, we saw part of the beauty of what we were looking at is their growth over time, especially in terms of Malcolm X. So it's like we're seeing someone who has this math problem and they're working it out in their head, but they're also verbalizing it, and we happen to be eavesdropping. And they're discovering on the way, I'm not 100% sure what the end goal is, but I know this isn't it. That was a lot of what they were saying. But the issue is sometimes we hold people to the standard that you can't complain about the problem unless you have a fully realized solution. You know, but I equate it to like saying, well, if I'm advising someone who's in an abusive relationship, they're getting beat physically, they're getting beat emotionally and psychologically. I would never advise that person saying, well, until you have another relationship that you can get into, you got to stay put. Like, no, I'm saying get out of Dodge and we'll deal with that second half of the equation later on. And so I believe that they didn't necessarily have all the answers, the end product, but as they lived, they began to say, the answer that we've been given thus far is not the right answer. It's not working for us. And early on, Malcolm's criticism of Dr. King was that it seemed like Dr. King was a little bit more amicable to the answer. And him later on in life, he began to say, you know what? Can I have some clarification? Can I revise what I thought was this isn't the answer either? And I believe that's when you get stuffed out, when you begin to say, you know what, I'm no longer satisfied. So when you say that they said, I can no longer be silent, when someone truly makes it up in their mind that they will no longer be silent, someone says, I gotta silence you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now you have no choice but to be silenced in someone else's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Were you gonna go up to the?
Yeah, this is last. I know we're just, but you get the last. You get the last question, comment. Excuse me. Yeah.
This is the mic drop question right here. This is the end all be all.
I want to thank both of you also, and also I really appreciated, Theo, you saying that you weren't sure you were willing to die for the cause, because I feel like I'm somebody that's not very brave, and I feel like also that because I'm not very brave, that it's important to appreciate the small contributions that every person makes, and that those of us who aren't very brave, when we make one small contribution, it encourages us, and then we get more brave. And so, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I mean, it's real talk. I think about in the movie, I think it was Barbershop 2, there's this scene where Cedric Entertainer is having a flashback to when he was joining the Black Panther movement. And they was like, tonight's gonna be a big night for the movement. We got our guns, and the cops got their guns. They was like, yeah, we're gonna shoot them, they're gonna shoot us. Yeah, some of them gonna die, and some of us gonna die. And all of a sudden he was like, he started stepping away. He's like, this isn't what I signed up for. It sounds good. It sounds good. We're gonna do this and we're gonna fight this until we start reading the cost. By the way, loss of life, like you ever like the commercials about take this medicine for your heart disease, and then you get to the list of all the complications, the side effects. But it'd be like, you do this, you be about this life, you fight for justice, and here are some of the side effects. Loss of job, loss of friend, and then all of a sudden you be like, you know what? I'm not saying I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna need some time to really think about this. You know, I gotta consult some people on this one right here. You know, I'll get back to you.
And you know, and this is my last comment on this is, which I think, thank you for that comment, because I think certainly the movement needs give what you got and give from where you are, right? And I'll end with this, is that what I love about Malcolm and Martin and those folks is they evolved. And so where we are right now is not where we're going to be necessarily a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, or tomorrow necessarily. And so we just need to be we need to recognize where we are, what we can do and what we can give, and stay open to continuing to grow and develop. And that means we might have other things to give down the road, and those are going to be equally important.
And the last thing I'll add that just summarizes that, just popped in my mind hearing you say that. We have to be both revolutionary and evolutionary. We can't just want to have the revolution, but not be willing to evolve. Because part of the revolution is there's this fed upness, there's this collective fatigue. We don't know what is fully right or what the full product is, but we know this isn't it. Well, since we don't know the end of it, we need to be able to evolve, to say, you know what, I once said these things over here. Now that I've had time to live a little, and I want to amend that. I still believe that this is how we should be going, but here's how we should maybe amend the process. And I think they both did that, and if we're willing to do that also, to submit to the wise counsel of others. You know, I love speaking with this brother. You know, we were chopping it up last night, but even during this, hearing some stuff that helped me evolve in my thinking, challenged me in my thinking. I think that's very important. We can't just be revolution. We also have to have evolution.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And with that, we're gonna end it with that. And I want to thank all of you, those of you who are still with us virtually. Thank you for joining us. Those who are here in person, thank you so much. And thank you all for your comments and questions and thoughts and participating with us. I just want to end by saying that Our next event for Black History Month is this Wednesday here at the Red Heritage Center. Will be also streamed virtually, but it will be looking at and reflecting on the contributions of Toni Morrison, one of the most brilliant writers, intellectuals of the 20th and 21st century. And there's a very rich panel discussion that's gonna kind of really give honor to the contribution that she's made. And we always need to honor and respect the Black women who've contributed, who
Yes.
often get forgotten, because we have such strong male leaders like Martin, like Malcolm, but we need to make sure that everybody who's part of this is included, and especially knowing for myself, without a Black woman, I wouldn't be here. So,
Preach.
so thank you. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, blessings.